First of all, I just would like to welcome everyone to this community meeting in defense of Shockoe Bottom, the No Stadium in Shockoe Bottom campaign. We are here for the, by some people's counting, third time, and by other people's counting, the fourth time. As I recall, the first group tried twice in the same year to get this done. This meeting is designed to bring you, again, the information that we do have and sort of a status update on what's been happening since this last plan was made public, and then to basically send you out, hopefully armed with a lot of information, as well as the petition and any ideas that we discuss here today about how you can take this struggle to your own household. In essence, what we find is that on the one hand, we could say, leap out there and, jump in front of trains and, make the big dramatic efforts and that kind of thing, but it really always starts with conversations, and it always starts with how well you communicate your commitment to a struggle to the people who are closest to you. I don't know, I'm sure all of you have had an instance where you believed something really strongly, and the hardest people to convince were your siblings or your parents or your cousins or your best friend. And you had to work out and then bring it back in. And I think most struggles are like that. And Richmond, and certainly in terms of this issue, has behaved that way. We have always had to go out and bring pressure from the outside in order for them to recognize that this issue actually has significance in the broader community, and help us recognize that. And so since we all behave that way, then that's what we want to do. At the same time, one of the ways that we can be the most convincing is by having those conversations in some of the most normal day-to-day activities. So it's in your conversations with people, while you're waiting at the doctor's office, or while you're, all the places where we do that sort of profound chit-chatting that we do because it's safe and because the moment provides the opportunity. So what we hope is that that's what's going to come out of today. Is we'll take it there. You will then also feel empowered and strengthened and supported to be part of the more public actions that get taken, and that you then feel strong enough to be willing to sort of step out from behind a little bit and say, yes, I stand for this. I may not speak like a mayor, and I may not speak like a senator or a delegate or whatever, but I can stand here and let you know that I believe in this thing. And that proves to be very, very effective. It certainly proves effective in city council meetings if you're trying to have an impact, at least on somebody's opinion in your district. So that is kind of at least what some of us have had in mind as we have thought through this particular meeting. Many of you have been to these kinds of communication meetings or planning meetings before, and you have seen progress in this struggle. Sometimes it's forward, sometimes it's backwards. So we're here again to try to push it forward. That being the preamble to the program, I want to ask all of us to thank Reverend Hunter for the use of the hall today and his congregation, because of course they grant us that grace as well. We also want to thank Collective X for the donuts that accompanied the coffee this morning. Thank Phil for the coffee. And of course, thank you all for coming out today. And there will be some people that we are going to want to acknowledge in the room. But one of the ways that I wanted to do that is to ask, are there people here who represent organizations that we would like to acknowledge, let people know are here to stand on this issue?
Good morning, Hotel. Most of y'all know me by now. My name is Omar Wiley, and I represent the African Ancestral Chamber. Stand upon the strong shoulders of our ancestors. I'm very happy and honored to do that.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody. I'm Oxfrey, and I do full-time ancestral remembrance work under the name of Beloved Unseen. And actually, good news today, I was asked to write a piece in Grid Magazine, so it will contextualize the whole scope of it in the next edition.
Several of us are here from the First Unitarian Universalist Church in Richmond.
Great. Yes.
I feel like this is grandiose, but I feel I represent the people who go to the ballpark. I'm a baseball fan
Yeah.
for almost 85 years, and I'm happy to really
Yeah.
dig what you're talking about.
All right. Thank you. Yeah.
My name is Kelsey, and I, along with Michelle and Kendall here, represent the Baker's Collective.
Great. Anybody else?
Shaker Didn't Walk, if we have to Shaker Didn't Walk, representing the San Jose projects, and we have groups.
You're on the program. Okay. Anybody else? All right. That's wonderful. Really, really. I'm more excited. Okay. I suddenly realized that I'm not sure I remember where the restrooms are, but hopefully you were guided when you got here. I just, want you to know so you can get up freely. And but I do know that if you go out of either one of these doors, and I believe it, go back to the hallway. I think that's where the restrooms are. The program is going to be sort of split into two parts. One will be the presentations by the people that we have invited to help bring some information to you. And then the second part will be the community discussion. During the presentations, or at the point at which people are giving presentations, when they have finished, we are going to have people, I'll just say it. We're going to allow you to ask two audience questions aloud at that point. Just so that we can continue with that part, and try to think of those questions as addressing that person's specific presentation. During the community conversation part of it, the second half of the program, that's when all the other questions can be brought and all the other comments can be brought to it. But I think that will help us sort of begin to think proactively about what we are going to talk about in the second half of the program, guided by some of the information that you get from the presenters. So, by way of starting things off, my name is Anna Edwards. I'm the chair of the Sacred Ground Historical Reclamation Project of the Defenders for Freedom, Justice, and Equality. I've also been doing a radio program called Defenders Live since 2005, which was a partner project of the Virginia Defender newspaper. I'm really here at this moment just to state the position of the Sacred Ground Project on this baseball stadium, which is no. And the reasons for that have been based on an interest in discovering and preserving the history of Shockoe Bottom, and also addressing the issue of process for people who did not have the right to self-determination at the time that the burial ground was active, at the time during the period in which we were formally enslaved. As people who could not determine what could happen to even their burials, we now have an ability we didn't have then, and therefore we need to exercise it. One of the challenges is that we are still people who are products of the system that has evolved ever since then, and it's often very difficult to recognize when and where we have the right to assert that self-determination and what that represents. So for me, this project and the story of Gabriel's Rebellion and the idea of resistance in Richmond and its history represents the opportunity to say that we should now do things differently. Even in our community, in the Black community, where we have a Black political system that has sought to be part of the system that the United States uses, a capitalist system, a so-called democratic system, and the attempts to claim a piece of that, to claim a part of that. Some of that struggle has been terribly important and is not to be negated, and it's not my intention to qualify it either, even as I sound like I'm qualifying it. But none of that has ever been possible from within the system to start with. We've always had to act from outside of the system in order to become a part of it. It also means that from outside of the system, we can make change, so that if that formal structure that has been put into place is not working, we can change it. but not unless we feel like we own this thing. Not unless we feel like Richmond is ours and Shockoe Bottom is ours and how we are governed belongs to us. Whatever the process is, that's what we are supposed to be really claiming and taking ownership of. And so for me personally, I would just say this part of the struggle is for me personally, and that is that the physical sites are not going to be as valuable to me in the end if we are not addressing the process by which these decisions are made. And the fundamental problem that we have had with the Slave Trail Commission specifically is that they have claimed a process and shut everyone out of it. Even as they are probably the best positioned vehicle to do such good work for this site, they shut the community out on purpose. And I don't just say that from my position and my observations, but from countless observations from people who have attended meetings and from people who have served on that commission and tried to have an impact, tried to have ideas to contribute to what will happen. And so this is what becomes most important to me, is that you have the capacity and the willingness and the wherewithal and then the sheer nerve, you know, to just say that if that is not right, we belong as a part of this process. The work that was done in the New York African Burial Ground is a demonstration of that struggle in action. And it was so important and recognized as such that the Interpretive Center at the New York African Burial Ground includes not only the interpretation of the history of that site as a burial ground, but it includes an exhibition that chronicles the struggle itself to claim that site and to assert the Black community's first right to determine what happens with it, because it's their bones, it's their sacred site, it's their people. That's first. And you would do that with your family. I have the say on where I will be buried, what will happen to me, not someone out there. So it's only that I think we are actually working for. The physical sites give us a place to stake our claim to that territory of both concept and reality. And that's what I am always hoping comes out of the struggle for this burial ground, the recognition of the significance of Gabriel's rebellion. Now we're looking into the life of his wife, who's very quietly lurked in the background. Nan was his wife, and she was an active participant. Even if there's no really good information about it, there are allusions to her role in that rebellion, which means the role of the women in the lives of these men was critical to the success of that rebellion, at least to the point at which it would have taken place. And we can't forget those invisible stories, and that is part of the reason why we need the sites. We need to acknowledge the sites, and we need to celebrate, commemorate. Sometimes we need to mourn, but at the very least, we need to make them a part of the pool of common knowledge that we all share so that it continues forward, that we carry it forward. So I'm going to stop there. And I'm going to introduce Monica Esparza, who is with the African Ancestral Chamber, and she is co-chairing today this meeting. And she's been doing powerful work all along, also quietly, and now not so quietly. So.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Hannah. Greetings to all, to the defenders, to all of our distinguished panel, to all of our guests. Again, thank you for coming today, for your concern, for your actions in the preservation of our sacred sites. I'm the owner of I'm the owner of Afro City Tours and a member of the African Ancestral Chamber. And our mission is to preserve and maintain the sacredness and legacy of our African culture. That is something that we find missing or in need of greater attention here in Richmond, Virginia. Oftentimes, our stories are told from the perspective of Negro. And although we know that that was a name called to us, our true identity is African. And we need to continue in identifying who that was and discovering who we are, who we were in the past and the present. Today I want to share a view of the AAC related to the stadium. And this is a statement coming from the AAC. Whereas this metropolitan view is inclusive in respect to any and all of the various cultures worldwide. We affirm our position from an African American perspective with our collective focus, espousing our rich legacy, history, and unfathomable contribution to humankind. Our view of Shockoe Bottom in regards to its revitalization is vehement opposition to the city's plan to erect a sports stadium around the proposed slave museum or near the slave trail of enslaved Africans, that is, or any of its compartments, buildings, areas, etc. We cannot stand by and watch the city cover up or pave over our painful but contributing history in Shockoe Bottom, as was done in the name of urban revitalization, destroying Navy Hill, Fulton communities, and yes, even the African burial ground, rescued but still languishing under the I-95 corridor. We consider the erection of a sports stadium in Shockoe Bottom as a lewd insult to any of Africans' dignity and presence. To even suggest an analogy of slavery as a sport by any hint is not only unconscionable, but is despicable and immoral. We can only imagine what may actually lay under the surface of Shockoe Bottom. The excavation of Lumpkin's jail reveals that there is likely a significant amount of truth to be found in the land which portrays African sacrifice to the American sovereign. Later we will hear a detailed description of what was found at the New York burial ground as an example of what archaeology can do. Even as the waters of Hurricane Gaston lifted pavement, bones surfaced. We know what happened here, and we must guard against the disregard of African cemeteries and sacred sites, stemming back to the early days of mummy snatching. It is not too much to candidly ask the city of Richmond to devote a few more acres to the millions who suffered from the African Holocaust in America. We ask that you stand with us to ensure that never again will urbanization contribute to the decimation of key African heritage sites in Richmond. Shockoe Bottom is one of the most important historical sites in North America and offers people who will never be able to trace their lineage on paper a place to commune with the past. This city needs Shockoe Bottom if it is ever to heal from the past, because in Virginia, Africans have been denied a history of their own for too long. Your voice is needed to preserve this history, which will forever be silenced if we don't act. Please remember, the change begins with me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
It is my great pleasure to introduce at this time the speakers for our program. We have, and I'm going to list them all at once, the distinguished Dr. Sean Utsi, who is chair of the African American Studies Department at VCU, who will share the importance of Black community defending sacred sites. Dr. Phil Schwartz, Professor Emeritus of History at VCU, will share about Richmond's critical role in the slave trade. We have Shadra Pittman Walk, founder of the Sankofa Project, who will share a story of one of the ancestors from the African burial grounds. And also Phil Wilato of the Virginia Defender newspaper will discuss the petition and action proposals. So at this time, Dr. Sean Utsi, please.
Good morning, everyone. Let me just begin by saying it really was an honor when Phil asked me to say some words, and I am happy to do so, and thank you, Phil, for inviting me. It simply reminds me kind of what my role has been here in Richmond, and it seems like I'm always coming to meetings about the humanity of African people, and it just seems peculiar. But I want to do three things as I was sitting and thinking about what I might share that might have some meaning. I want to first point out some interesting symbolisms about what's being proposed. And I want to share a story about some work I've done out in Tulsa that's very relevant to this struggle and the importance of the black community being invested. And finally, I want to make a recommendation about how we might get some movement and how we might redirect our efforts to kind of make those who profess to be there on our behalf work for us and put some heat on the Slave Trade Commission. And so let me begin. And so I was sitting there thinking about how ridiculous it is to propose a baseball stadium in Shockoe Bottom, or a baseball stadium, and forgive me, baseball fans, anywhere in Richmond. It seems like the one on Boulevard is not working out that well. To simply move it to Shockoe Bottom doesn't seem very business savvy. And quite honestly, if I'm trying to be objective, which is very difficult to do, there are a lot of other things that they could have proposed to Shockoe Bottom that would have made more sense. And so it seems to me that perhaps there's something beyond the economic engine that most people agree is not there. And perhaps it's something that's not necessarily conscious, but subconscious. And a disclosure that I'm a psychologist, so from time to time I delve into the unconscious, very similar to tea leaf reading, but not quite. but just as illegitimate or legitimate, however you see it. But it seems to me that Richmond's history, for both black folk and white folk, and I always make the analogy, and whether we like it or not, there's some reality that black folk and white folk in America have a unique relationship. There is much history with it. It's almost like an incestuous family. And in some cases, it is an incestuous family. And as a consequence, we have family secrets, right? And there are things we do to protect ourselves from these family secrets. There are things we do psychologically to reassert our authority in that relationship whenever it's in question. And there are things that we do symbolically to establish our roles in this relationship. And I think that Richmond is really a laboratory to understand those relationships. Richmond was symbolically the capital of the Confederacy, and that has important symbolic meaning that I think that when we examine Monument Avenue and we get upset and all flustered about why, that's important symbolism, that the folk are trying to send a message about power and authority. You see, so it's a very interesting thing, when you are engaged in the struggle for power, getting power is only part of the equation. Maintaining power and reminding others of your power is an ongoing process. It has to happen. As soon as people forget about your power is threatened. You follow me, right? And so thinking about this stadium as another monument to establish one's power and authority cannot be dismissed. Particularly when you understand that baseball is really the last bastion of white athletic supremacy in sports. And so it kind of seems like we have to understand the symbolism of this drive to impose this meaningless economic venture in Shockoe Bottom, in a place that has so much symbolic meaning for the powerless, right? So Shockoe Bottom is our symbol, to some regard, subconsciously and unconsciously, of our powerlessness in this relationship, right? And it's also the symbol of the America's powerfulness in that space. And so I think the struggle for this space is really symbolic of a struggle for humanity and a struggle for the maintenance of power and domination. So we have to understand the meaning behind what's going on here, right? Because that's going to determine the strategy. So if we're trying to have a conversation logically about the importance of respecting our history, we're really probably having the wrong conversation when people are making decisions based on other kinds of processes. Okay, so I think it's going to be important that we think deeply about what's happening, what's actually happening here, and we have to have an historical context of this place and space to do that. All right? Now, what I want to do next is to talk about, real briefly, and really, folks, and you don't know how much Richmond has meant to me in ways that weren't meant to be. Because I've been allowed to grow here and to think more about not only myself, but myself in the context of African people and other folk in general. And so I've had other experiences like that have been meaningful to me beyond imagination. And one that I want to share with you that has some relevance to this discussion is some work I've done in Tulsa, Oklahoma. When I was on faculty at Howard University, that's where I was before I came to VCU, me and 3 of my graduate students took a trip to Tulsa, Oklahoma. And most folk at that time had heard of Tulsa, Oklahoma as the Black Wall Street. It was home of the Black Wall Street. The Greenwood section of Tulsa, back in the early 1900s, was probably the wealthiest, and close by was certainly Richmond. But Oklahoma, Tulsa, Greenwood was probably the wealthiest black community in the country. They had 155 black-owned businesses. We're talking about 30-block radius. There aren't that many black-owned businesses in the whole state of Virginia now, right? Greenwood was 90% home ownership, right? These folks had their own churches, their own businesses, their own cleaners, their own movie theater, own lawyers. The famous historian John Hope Franklin is from Tulsa, Oklahoma. His parents were in fact attorneys. His father was an attorney in Tulsa during a very tumultuous time. But the story that I went to Tulsa for was not Black Wall Street, but the race riot of 1921, or like a misnomer race riot. It was actually a race war, and perhaps a massacre. But Tulsa, again, this is the analogy. Tulsa was the epitome of black sovereignty. Black folks in that space were not dependent on the white economic machine for anything. As a consequence of segregation and their own invention, they had carved out an economy that was thriving and booming, and in fact may have been thriving more than the majority of the white community. And that's what set in motion what would happen. It's well documented that there was much resentment by the white folk, particularly the poor and less affluent white folk, about the well-being of the black community. And that they had their sights on that community, which was close to the railroad tracks. And being close to the railroad tracks is has strategic importance. And so, long story short, there was a guy named Dick Rollins. Yes. And he was a boot black, or he shined shoes near the railroad station across from a business a building that was an office building. And so every day he would go up to the top floor to use the bathroom. They permitted him to do that. And so one day he got in the elevator, and there are several stories that happen here. This is where it gets tricky. But anyway, the primary story is that when the woman, young white girl, hit the thing to close the door, the elevator shook, and Dick fell forward and tried to catch himself and grabbed her. She screamed, he ran, and things were forever changed. They went and arrested Dick, took him to the jailhouse. A lynch mob was forming. The black community, many of which had just returned from World War I, many of which were well armed because they were well-to-do families and had plenty of rifles. About 4 or 5 black men met and said, we're not going to allow this to happen. They got their guns. And this is really mind-blowing. When you think about the narrative we've gotten here about black behavior in the South in the 1920s, 1919, these black men went and got their rifles, went down to the courthouse where they were going to protect Dick Rollins from getting lynched. So they went down there, car full of them, rifles drawn, got out, and confronted the white mob that had gathered. A struggle ensued. One gentleman tried to take the rifle from the black man, one of the black men. The rifle went off, and all hell broke loose, literally. Communities went their separate ways and regrouped. And the black community went to agree with this section. They positioned themselves in the church bell tower and other perimeter areas. The white community gathered about 300 people. And this is all documented. A whistle went off, like woo, about 12 midnight. And that's when the white crowd moved in. The black defenders in the initial skirmish killed about 14 of the white men from the community. The white men regrouped, and they then called in the sheriffs. The sheriffs deputized every able-bodied white male in that community. This is, again, all documented. Deputized them. They regrouped, and they came back in and literally razed the entire community. They razed the entire community. There are reports, documented reports, that there were aircrafts dropping incendiary devices on the black community. They were also doing a reconnaissance from the air to see where folks were going. Black folks were trying to flee to other towns. They were being shot at by people in the other towns who saw them coming. So I went to Tulsa to talk to the survivors of the race war. These folks were now in their mid-90s. The oldest was about 108. He recently died about 6 months ago. I went to hear their stories. I went to understand how black folk in the 1900s could have the gumption, despite the stories that I had heard about our servility and our acquiescence in the face of white authority, how they would get their rifles and go down there to prevent a black man from being lynched and then defend their community, right? I didn't understand that. That was not the narrative I had heard. And then I began to understand that these folks, they saw themselves differently. They saw themselves as having a right, as having dignity and humanity that was worth defending. They saw it as their duty to go down there and protect this man. You see? And so I think the worldview of the black community in Tulsa should be our model. That the black community in Richmond has a right to defend our humanity, not only a right, but an obligation to defend our humanity. And that we have to get our means of defense and be able and willing to go down to the seat of authority and to assert ourselves, that we're not going to allow this. It just won't happen, right? And I think that that's where we need to arrive at. And so I'm hoping that the Tulsa model can be an example of how a community who sees themselves as invested in something. Because the black folks in Tulsa, they were not there as a consequence of slavery. They came to Tulsa. Many of them came to Tulsa, ironically, with their slave owners who were Native Americans. When Native Americans were thrown out of North Carolina, and Virginia, and South Carolina and sent on the Trail of Tears, they took their enslaved Africans. And yes, many of us like to claim our Native American ancestry, but many times that was a consequence of being owned. Now, certainly there were marriages and so forth and so on, but that's how the black folks got to Tulsa. So perhaps their legacy began as one of empowerment, but then in any event, that model, I think, is proven effective. We can learn from that. My last point, because Anna's giving me the wrap-up signal. The last point I want to make is that we have to perhaps bring pressure to bear on the Slave Trade Commission. We know where they meet. Many of us don't go because we don't feel we'll be welcomed when we arrive. I've witnessed firsthand several people who tried to speak and were shut down, almost shushed, and literally. And so that's intolerable. And perhaps that approach was ill-conceived to begin with. That I'll go to the Slave Trade Commission, raise my hand during questions and answers, and have some input. That's not what they did in Tulsa. You know what I'm saying? We need a Tulsa approach to the Slave Trade Commission. We go to the Slave Trade Commission and nobody speaks until we speak. They don't meet. There'll be no meeting until the community is heard. Now, how hard is that? That's not going to be very difficult, right? And we have to make sure that the message is loud and clear. So that's my recommendation, that we talk at the Slave Trade Commission, and we not go there and ask them to hear us. We go there and tell them what we have to say. And there'll be no meeting until you hear it. And we'll be here every month. It's really quite simple. All right? And we would love to have the media there to let them know that it's a new day, so the city can know. And believe me, this is why, and again, many of the heroes in the black community have been those folks who've been unafraid. Minister Malcolm, Minister Marco Garley, Minister Farrakhan. Even black folks who are conservative, behind the scenes, love these people. Because they say and do things we're afraid to say and do. That's right. Right? And so I think that we have to let other black folks in Richmond know that we're unafraid. And they'll come out. We saw that with the slave, with the burial ground. When folks began to get the signal that the black community is unafraid and they're asserting themselves in a manner that reflects that, everyone came out. But right now, the way it is, and we've seen it at the Slave Trade Commission, people are afraid. Even people on the Slave Trade Commission are afraid to dissent, even when they want to. And so when somebody asserts himself, everyone feels safer to now dissent and express themselves. So I'm recommending that we go to the Slave Trade Commission with a new approach. And that we then get the message out to the black community, to the other community of allies, that we're unafraid. And I think we'll see the numbers increase. Anyway. But again, I want to thank all of you for allowing me to share my thoughts. And Anna and Phil and Monica, thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank you for your presentation. Are there any questions?
Oh, that's right.
2 questions.
Yes.
I want to know, brother, if you, and really anyone who can chime in, can shed some light on the role and responsibility of the commission and how that plays in terms of, you know, what authority do they have to really help impede the efforts?
Good question. I was just sharing earlier my interpretation, and this is my interpretation, of the Slave Trade Commission. The Slave Trade Commission, it seems by the city council charter, has a pretty ambiguous and broad range of responsibilities and duties that are not really clearly defined. Nor is the membership or how you become a member or how you, none of that's clearly defined. It seems to me that it's become a political mechanism to kind of advance agendas that will result in currency for other purposes. That's my interpretation. And that's how issues get selected. Issues that are safe and that have the most political currency will be the ones they deal with. This whole slavery museum, all right? Doug Wilder is probably one of the most famous black Americans still living. Whether we like him or not, or he is. First black governor in the U.S. since Reconstruction, is that right? He can call Bill Cosby. He did call Bill Cosby and got some money. He can make phone calls that we can't make. He can make phone calls no one on the Slave Trade Commission can make. And he couldn't pull off a museum. Right? It seems to me that that's not a real, a viable, a viable goal for the Slave Trade Commission that's achievable in the near future to pursue. But it seems to me, if I was a politician, right, trying to assert my legacy, that would be something I'd be doing. So it seems like there's a competition, this is just my opinion, folks, with Doug Wilder in the Slave Museum. That's what it seems to be about to me, right? Because there are 101 things that can be done in the next year or so that would advance that work in real ways. And some of those things were done. All fairness, the marker program is one example of how something very simple and small can be done that begins to illuminate that history, right? And there are a bunch of things that we could do. The Slavery Museum is like, how much they need, 100 million?
Yeah, at least.
Come on. That's half the budget of the city.
Right. Now, I'm going to follow up on that, because one of the parts of his question, too, is more like literally. What is it that the Slave Trail Commission is empowered to do? Like, what actual authority do they have over the site and over, not just what the head of it wants to do and use it for, but what they are actually maybe legally allowed to do?
Yeah. Again, those duties are ambiguous. And it's not in the bylaws because that site didn't exist when the bylaws were drawn up, right? They are kind of the guardians, and they make recommendations. I don't think they have any legal authority or any ownership of anything. They don't own the burial ground or even Lumpkins. They make recommendations, and as a consequence, they raise money and other resources, and they get things done. But as far as authority, I don't think they have any real authority, like ownership. City Council, they're a commission that City Council has created. It's like a commission, like they said we need a commission to study black male academic achievement. And they would have a commission. The commission doesn't have any ownership. They just make recommendations to folks to do things. Yes?
I just wanted to add that the current move is to turn it into a private foundation. And it's like so close to happening that it won't even be.
It's done. They've received it. They are now, they
So
are assessing how to transition into the nonprofit.
So it won't even be an issue of us being able to petition City Council for the election process to include more people. So our time for being able to address that.
Well, that's a good question.
Okay, in the interest of time.
Let me just wrap it up real quick. What happened, what they're thinking is that the museum, to raise money, you have to have it a full 301c, right? A foundation. It has to become a foundation so they can raise money. They couldn't do that on behalf of the city. Conflict of interest stuff. So now they have privatized the museum component. The Slave Trail Commission is not going to be dissolved. City Council would have to do that. Now, the privatization of the Slavery Museum is under the Slave Trail Commission's leadership or guidance, but I'm not sure how that's going to affect the things that are ordained to the Slave Trail Commission.
It's interest conflict, actually.
It would be. It would be, in fact, worse for them. Not only that, but then you can't really be an elected official, and there are two of them, and then raising money for, So I think that might be a good thing, actually.
In the community forum,
Yes, sir.
Your primary recommendation was to head down the Slave Trail Commission. Despite the fact that you have the authority, I was wondering if you could break your proposed message to the Slave Trail Commission down into one or two major points. What would they be, given that they have no authority over the site? Would they be to persuade them to make recommendations
This is a good point. They have no real authority, but they do have authority by virtue of influence. Right? And so that's part of the problem, that the influence is more real than the actual authority. And so the message is going to be that you're going to hear what we have to say, or it's not going to happen. It's not going to be any movement. There'll be no meetings unless you have them in private, and then you're in violation of the city council's requirement to have public meetings. It's simple. It's agitation. It's agitation.
Why not just talk to the mayor directly? I've had conversations with him, and he's open to circumventing the whole Slave Trail Commission.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt now because this part, what you're doing right now is what we're going to do in the second part. So we want to let the presentation flow.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, okay, thank you so very much. Let's give them another round of applause. Yes, we want to continue that discussion. The African Chamber has been going to their meetings very regularly, and so we can provide some updates and reports on that. Our next presenter is Dr. Phil Schwartz, Professor Emeritus of History at VCU, to provide us information on Richmond's critical role in slavery. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. I've been fooling with numbers, which they put people to sleep. It's what happened, what the impact was. And there's one thing that people would like to know. How many African-descended people were put in the prisons, the slave places, and we don't have the numbers. We don't. You can go to the website, slavevoyages.org. 12,521,000 people documented as being brought from Africa into the Western Hemisphere. We don't have that kind of number for Richmond. We have an idea. We look at what happens in order to get the idea of what Richmond meant. There was, of course, importation until 1782. It was illegal after that. Don't think it stopped it, but it was illegal after that, and things started to change. And stop, go away. All right. And by that happening, it changed the economic system, namely, are we going to buy slaves from Africa? No. We are going to keep on buying people who are here. It was going to stay in Virginia. That's not enough. We want more. Maryland was selling a lot of people. They were downsizing the African-descended people. And a lot of them went to Virginia. A lot of them were sold all the way south. And the same thing happened with Virginia. The slave jails were there, and so many of those people were sent down. How were they sent down? Robert Lumpkin's jail is often cited, and we have fairly good information with him, but not enough as usual. And the idea was that the Lumpkin's jail had an ongoing economic impact, which meant ongoing suppression of the people who were forced into Lumpkin's jail to be sold anywhere they could be sold outside Lumpkin's jail. It was constant, day by day, month by month, year by year, going on and on. Robert Lumpkin is not the only one. Now, here's the amazing thing. Robert Lumpkin was a slave dealer. He had his money. He had opportunities to make more money, which he did. But the most important thing was that many people who went to the slave jail, who were forced into the slave jail, were shipped out. That was the point. Ship them out. Ship them south, because that's where the demand was. Simple economics, well, economics is never simple. It has consequences. And it's been hard to follow some of those situations. But some of you know about Henry Box Brown. Remember what happened to him. He had to walk on the side of his wife and children. He was not to be sold. His wife and children were sold. He walked beside them until he could not see them going south. And this is soul murder. It's that simple, soul murder. But people are very strong in many, many, many cases in order to deal with this. The turn was from importation, which stopped legally, then exportation, because exportation was a money maker, Well, who's doing the work? The people who were enslaved. They stayed in Richmond, and there seemed to have been enough people there. But it wasn't the same people from 1800, 1810, 1820, 1830, 1840. Different groups, of African descendant people were going through this charnel house, this grinder that was doing the same things that had been doing earlier. Definitely that. There were owners of these slave jails. This was an economic venture, and they worked together with people all over Virginia and other places. And there is an estimate that about 1/2 million people, 1/2 million, 500,000 people were exported out of Virginia from places like Lumpkin's Jail and Bacon Tate and the various others. It was just kept on going. You can imagine that if something like that starts and nobody stops it, then it keeps going. We're all doing it. Everybody else is doing it. We're competing, and it is a good thing. Well, of course it's not a good thing, but nobody had really high strength to stop it until the Civil War, all the way until the Civil War. Slave traders. They were in Alexandria, they were in Richmond, Norfolk, Petersburg, at any crossroad, any path, and eventually railroads. There were chances for people to start buying and selling. Even right on a train. And people, what, on a train? Yes, even that happened. Robert Lumpkin, you've heard about. And Robert Lumpkin was able to go with the punches. Madison, Washington. Some of you know, I hope all of you know about Madison, Washington. He led a revolt on the Creole, a slave ship that was going to be sent down to the Bahamas and other places for sale. Well, it got there, but the slave traders were not in charge. The Creole revolt occurred, and those people got out. And people are looking for where they went to after they were in the Bahamas, where the British said, well, we're not getting into this. And so somebody knows. If you ever find out, I want to know where these people went. But they got out. A few, 5 people, stayed on the Creole ship, went to New Orleans. And so there was a list of all the people who were originally on that ship. And it's fascinating to see that, and another way to understand how this grinding occurred. Then there are other people, and these are not all the slave traders at all. Silas Omohundro, he had a lot of money, and Dunlop McClure and Company, Pulliam and Davis, Bacon Tate, George W. Apperson, who was an owner. This thing is attacking me. Okay. Thank you. I'm free. George W. Apperson was an owner of the Creole. He was not on it, but he was an investor in that. Hector Davis went on by himself, and some people have called this a cohort of professional experts, of dentists, doctors, other things. These are professional experts at grinding the souls of people, African descended people. All right, what about selling down the river? Because after all, that was done in Africa, and then there was importation in the New World. I'm at a 15-minute, can you keep me on the, okay. The grinding still occurred. Selling down the river is one part of it, but that's not all of it. Upriver, upground, moving towards the west, going to what became West Virginia, going to other places. Just put out spokes all around Richmond, and the slave traders have been able to sell people by doing that. Now, because of the Creole Revolt, which was successful, almost every single person who was on that ship, Creole, that was taken over by the revolt. They got out. They got out. But a few stayed. But Lumpkin and others said, whoa, this is a problem. This means that there's a standard that the enslaved people can use to say, here's how I get out of this. If we get on one of those ships, we plan it. We plan it before, we plan it during, and we do it and control it. And they would lose some people. Well, Lumpkin and others said, whoa, this is a problem. This is going to cut our income. And we've got to do something about that, which was we're going to go from overland shipment. You all know about all the trails where people were in coffles, same as Africa could be at some times, but here these people were roped together, and there were people with guns before and after them to make sure they didn't run away, and they had people who could run after people who tried to run away. It kept that southward exportation going to the benefit of so many people in the slave trade. There was one way for white people to say, well, you know, this is okay, meaning white leaders sometimes claimed selling away enslaved people, which improved Virginia. Sometimes you have to stop and say, what the heck are you saying? But you can see some white people seeing that. All right, what was the human cost? Well, you can't measure it. There's no possibility to measure it. Speaking of measurement, you're going to count me on my 15 minutes. Okay, how am I doing?
Oh, got 2 minutes.
3 minutes? 2 minutes. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, I won't ask you. All right. Frederick Douglass said in his speech, he was in England. You know why he was, because he was in trouble. But slave marts and churches stood in the same marketplace in Richmond. The groans of the slaves being sold in the shambles of Richmond were sometimes drowned by the pious shouting of their masters in the church close by. Frederick Douglass always had the words. Now, in 2004, a scholar had a book, and he said a very basic explanation. The basic reality of chattel slavery. Slaveholding required slave trading. Once there was slave holding, there was going to be slave holding. Once there was slave holding, there was going to be slave trading. And it was all kinds. Now, remembering, retracing, memorializing, reconciling ancestors and relatives, I wish I could give you names of all these people, but on the boats, the ships, there were names. But because the Lumpkin and others started staying away from the boats, we have fewer numbers, fewer names. I wish we could have those names. And the Richmond Slave Trail, Shockoe reconciliation statues, all part of trying to understand what happened. Questions? Yes.
And this question, I've been trying to formulate how I want to ask it.
Mm-hmm.
And you just said something that helped me get it into perspective when you used the word chattel slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, you know, slavery has existed, some form of enslavement has existed probably throughout time. Is that the significant difference in calling it chattel slavery?
Mm-hmm.
And is there any, not so much a single event, but a catalyst that may have occurred in history that said, you know, tag Africa, you're it?
Romans. I don't mean in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
Romans. Romans had a Latin term, partus sequitur ventrem.
Yes.
Anybody know your Latin? It means the condition of the child follows the condition of the mother. A lock. And that was way back before the time of Christ, when the Romans had that. And it was continued in 1662, Virginia legislature said, partus sequitur ventrum. And, well, okay, people can run away, and I hope they did successfully. I hope they, you say, well kept, well treated. Well, it's not being well treated to be enslaved, but to get as much family life as they could. Okay, other questions? Yes?
I would ask, and this probably would be something we probably deal more with in the broader discussion, but I'd like to at least throw it out right now. Because there's a lot of things that I believe that some of us may know more than others in relationship to our history, particularly in the Shockoe Bottom area. But I think all of us in some cursory manner understand that the legacy of African enslavement is tied to that physical space. What would be some of, or at least one of, the historical markers that can really be flushed out to help us in regards to this struggle?
Okay, historical marker, one is, go to Maryland, when the decrease of slavery occurred there. It wasn't decreasing the way some people wanted it to in Virginia, though. But it was the U.S. colored troops, the United States troops, the Civil War, the superiority on the battle, the mortality of all that. That's a very great cause of ending that slavery. There's something called near slavery, and you can bet in various plantations near slavery existed, but it wasn't on the law books anymore. And they couldn't take a group of people to a building and say, I've got 5 strong men here, and I have 3 breeding women, and we can sell you who want to buy. No. So it all changed. It's not right today. Think just how long women's rights has been worked on by so many people. So many people. Is it finished? No. Am I finished? No. I'm not either. We all human beings. All right, I've done my 15 minutes.
Good job.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Dr. Schwartz and Dr. Utsi are 2 very distinguished scholars in our community. We very much appreciate the time that you take to come and share that information with us.
Thank you. I'm learning here.
Thank you. Next up is a very unique perspective because it's not from Richmond. And we want to especially thank this young lady from coming up all the way from Hampton, Virginia, to be with us today and share the story of a person previous from long ago. She's going to talk about what's it called? Okay, well, I'll let you explain. But anyway, what I want to say is that it speaks to the deep need to understand what is beneath us, what's beneath our feet. You know, we look at a blank piece of space and say, oh, you know, anything can go there. We don't know really what's down there until we've done that research, that digging. And so allow me to introduce, please, Shadra Pittman Walk. She is the founder of the Sankofa Project and formerly affiliated with the African Burial Grounds in New York. Shadra, please.
Hello. I'm so excited to be here. You have no idea. I want to thank Monica for inviting me, and also the Defenders for Freedom, Justice, and Equality for having me here, and the African Ancestral Chambers. I founded the Sankofa Projects, which is down in Hampton, Virginia. And basically, the Sankofa Project, as you see someone that I know, the Sankofa Project is an organization. We do educational and cultural programs. And a big part of what we do are remembrance ceremonies. And these ceremonies have a 23-year tradition, the tradition that we follow. And they are remembrance ceremonies dedicated to the Africans who never made it off the enslavement ships alive, because they never got a proper burial. So the remembrance ceremonies that we do, we actually did one last weekend, which they came down, and my Aunt Free actually did a reading for us, a meditation, which was absolutely beautiful. And I just want to say a couple of things. There was quite a few things that the professor said that just, I was like, yes. So I was taking notes. I felt like I was in class again. But my affiliation is with the African Burial Ground. I worked at the African Burial Ground in the 90s, 1996 to 1999, and I was a public educator. So I would go out into the community and talk about the New York African Burial Ground. And it was really interesting because a lot of people who were in New York had no idea. We were in Manhattan. We'd go to Brooklyn and Queens, and people did not know that the burial ground existed, which was mind-blowing to me. The burial ground was rediscovered because the government wanted to build a building. And it was, the building is 290 Broadway, and it is a building that was going to house the FBI and the CIA's office. And they said, they looked at historical maps, they saw this Negroes burying ground, which the language is quite interesting, we'll talk about that in a minute. But Negroes burying ground, and they said, we'll probably find a couple of burials. Well, 419 burials later, intact, men, women, and children, were found. The thing about this burial ground that really, and the reason why I'm still talking about it 17 years later, is that this burial ground, people said, historians said, slavery didn't happen in New York. People went to New York to be free. It's not correct. So this burial ground really shook up the preconceived notions that people had about history and culture and slavery. And, Maya Angelou, one of the quotes that I love from her is she says, it takes more than a horrifying transatlantic voyage to erase someone's culture. And we know that's true. And the evidence that we found from the burial ground proves that, because we found intact, in coffins, men, women, and children who were shrouded. They were wrapped in cloth. They were sitting in such a way that if they sat up, they would be facing east. Okay? We found a woman who was buried with her child. Now think about this. This burial ground was from the 1690s through the 1700s. Someone mentioned, I think Anna was talking about, the burial grounds and how we didn't have freedom. This was the one time, which is so wonderful, where we were afforded some freedom to bury our dead. So think about New York, people are enslaved, they're burying their dead. We don't know how this mother and child died, but the loved ones take the time to wrap the arm around the baby. They're dead, right? So what difference does it make? But that showed the love and concern and connection that they had, okay? One of the burials, well, before I get to this burial here, which I love her. I love them all, but this is my favorite, I would have to say. She's very endearing to me. Other things we found. File teeth, evidence of culture, okay? Waist beads, evidence of culture. Dental striations, we found things with the teeth which were proving the kinds of food that they ate. Dr. Michael Blakey, who is amazing, was a scientific director of this project. He led the team at Howard University you mentioned you were at Howard, he led the team at Howard University to look at these remains and figure out what their lives were like. Dr. Blakey and his team found that these conditions were on the bone, where the muscle literally ripped away from the bone, proving the work stresses that Africans went through. So as you were saying, Monica, about what lays beneath the ground, the only reason why this burial ground was discovered and preserved and excavated is because there was a cultural resource survey which was done, which was one of the questions I had about this burial ground, like what's been done, where are the archaeologists, what's going on? Who's on the team? Who's looking at these historical maps and figuring out? This cultural resource survey demanded that research be done. And once the research was done, that's when they started to find these remains. One of the remains that I spoke about at the program last week was burial number 25, and I just brought a picture of her, okay? Burial number 25 was a woman. I'm going to read you actually what I wrote about her, because if you heard this today, you would think that maybe this is like a modern murder story. Her body was found October 21st, 1991. She's an unidentified female, 22 years old, shot in the back at close range, suffered a Lefort fracture to her skull, which crushed her face, 22 years old, okay? Suffered a twisting fracture to her arm. So she was twisted, shot in the back. This is a musket ball, which lay alongside her ribs. Okay, that was the bullet of the day. Was she raped also? We have no evidence of that, but it could have happened, right? Who was she? So when we talk about these burials, they were living, breathing, just like us. This is a 22-year-old girl that was murdered. You know, I think a lot of times when we think about burial grounds and we think about remains and we're all scientific sometimes in our head, we forget to personalize them and think about that these were people who had hopes and dreams. This woman who was buried with her child and sure loved that baby, we don't know what happened to them, right? So one of the things that I wanted to say is that when we're talking about self-determination, one of the things that I can tell you that we learned from this, now I don't know if the Richmond burial ground here is going to excavate, I don't know what the plans are, but I will say this, that some of the things that we learned from this burial ground, the Africans in New York were very clear about who they were. There was no Negro, slave. That was not language they used at all. When Africans had an opportunity to define themselves, the notion of self-determination came up. They consistently used the term African. They didn't say colored. They didn't say Negro. I used to tease people when I used to lecture and say, there's no Negro land, okay? So when people talk about where people are from, negro is a color. You're describing someone. That is no connection to the homeland. And that's the part of the brutality, the horror of slavery, was trying to keep people, to disconnect them from their roots. Okay, Africans were really clear about who they were. The African Free Schools, the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Anytime they had an opportunity to name their organizations, they used the term African. And I'll show you this. We found in the Freedom's Journal, we had one of our assignments at the burial ground was to look at newspapers. And when I was doing the research, mine was a Freedom's Journal, and I was so happy that it was a Freedom's Journal because I found this advertisement that says, "To let, Cornelius Henry has just finished a handsome 2-story house frame on the new African burying ground." Now, this is in 1829. And what this said to the team was that if there was a new African burying ground, it had to be an old one. So although they were calling it the Negroes' burial ground, it wasn't African people who were writing those maps, right? So when Africans had an opportunity to name their burial grounds, they referred to it as African. That's self-determination. One of the things I want to say, Doctor, is it Utsi? Utsi, okay. You mentioned Black Wall Street. And I was like, yes, when you said that. Because this burial ground in New York, part of it is it's in the Wall Street area of New York, which is so fascinating because I would always tell people that, Wall Street was literally built on the backs and bodies of African people, figuratively and symbolically. The Slave Trail Commission, I wrote down a couple of things that I wanted to speak to. The Slave Trail Commission, I think part of what, anytime I hear the word slave, I cringe. I think part of the reason why maybe there's difficulty getting in there with that commission, part of it has to do with the name. Who named the Slave Trail Commission. Who are these people that are telling you, scholars in this area, that you can't come in and be a part of the conversation?
Negroes.
Yeah, how did that happen? I mean, I think that that's part of the brilliance of the scholars that you have in the room that are here at your, they're here and they're at this meeting, which shows that they're invested in this cause. How are they not leading this project? That's what the community needs to be outraged about. You need to be a part of the conversation. I tell you one thing, the New York descendant community, they were not having it. They were outraged. They would go into meetings and they would tell people, no, we are going to speak. We are not going to sit down. We have to say this, that, and the other. Why? Because we deserve to be a part of this conversation. And I think what has to happen is that those of us that are here have to inspire the other people that we're talking to. Like you said, in the places, barbershops or beauty parlors or wherever, churches. Talk to the people that you are around about this very subject. You know, like I said, I don't know if you're going to excavate. I don't know if that's, we've learned a lot from the New York African Burial Ground. Spiritually, excavations, I don't know. You know, I think we learned a lot from it, and I think that burial ground in New York gives us a lens to what slavery was. But I think the descendant community, which is a term that Dr. Blakey came up with, doesn't get credit for, and he should, but the descendant community really needs to take this by the horns. You know, these are your ancestors. These are our ancestors. We are connected to them. And even if they're not your ancestors, you're connected on a human level. You're connected because we're sentient beings and we all have feelings, right? So I think part of what has to happen here, I feel, is that the community has to come out. I mean, this building needs to be overflowing with people outside, angry. Say, what are you doing? How can you do this? And I think part of it is that often with history, people are so disconnected from it. It's so far away. I learned so much about what you were saying about Tulsa. I'm going to read everything that I can find now. I'm so inspired by that story, you know, that they were not going to allow that man to be lynched. Imagine, right? So that's the kind, I agree with you, that's the kind of passion and fervor that we have got to have about this burial ground. These are our ancestors. The remembrance ceremonies that we do, people said to me, oh, it's going to rain on Saturday. Are you still going to have it? Yes, it rained during slavery. It didn't stop because of rain. We have got to honor our ancestors. And you know, when we think ancestors, we think so far removed. But your ancestors, it's anyone who's passed away. So it's your aunt that you love. It's your grandpa. It's your wife or husband. You know, people that are connected to you. So we've got to do what we've got to do to make that connection. We are connected to those that came before us. We are connected to those that came before us. It is because of them, because they lived and some of them died, that we are here today. That's what we have to remember. There's so much to say about this subject. Where am I on time? Am I up? Am I up? Probably so. Okay, well, let me say the burial ground. I can talk about the burial ground forever. But anyway, does anybody have any questions? Yes?
I know I would thank you. I thank everyone who shared even before you. When you talked about the excavation, I respect that you talked about the spiritual aspect.
Absolutely.
Like that's a desecration. But in observing what the facts or what the realities reveal, and the reference to Africa, did you find any safe instruments, and let me be more specific, like maybe something that can be mathematically or scientifically equated to a slide rule, or artifacts, or indicators. I know you talked about dental. Really, you're talking about
Yeah,
If we would
dental
put
modification, yeah.
in our time.
Right.
Or this dimension.
Right.
Time dimension. And that's my question. Were there those kinds of things as well?
Yes, there were artifacts that were found. There were artifacts, I mentioned the waist beads,
Yes.
the glass beads were studied, and there were, one of the interesting things that we found was on top of a man that became known as the Sankofa man. And he was a very large man, and on top of his coffin, there were metal tacks that were in the shape of a heart. And so the scholars that they had in the room originally were thinking, oh, it's a heart, it must mean that that person loved that person. This is the beauty when you have a lot of different people sitting at the table. You really learn a lot, people from different cultures. It was an African scholar that said, that's not just a heart, that's Sankofa. And Sankofa is an Adinkra symbol of Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, which means, it's also a bird. So it's two symbols. It's the heart shape, and it's a bird. The bird has its head, its feet forward, but its head is biting back at its tail. And the symbolism of that is that in order to know where you're going, you have to know where you've come from. So that symbol, you know, the fact that it was on top of a coffin, that someone took the time to do that. So yeah, artifacts were found, work stresses were found on the body, as I mentioned. But yeah, a lot of material culture was found, which proved that Africans brought their culture here with them, that they held on to their culture, and they retained their culture. And they made it a part of their burial practice, which really debunked a lot of the theories that had been told about, oh, they left it with them. They didn't bring it off the enslavement ships. Not true. So, anything else?
I hope the chairperson will let me make a comment afterwards. I find all this fascinating, but I have no question.
Okay.
Well, then in that case, if you have no other questions, thank you again so much for your presentation. Yes, what's your comment?
May I stand up?
Yes, it will be brief though, right?
Okay. I'll try to be very brief, and I don't mean to be presumptuous. I hope, without being condescending, that I can say that I really love this caring about our ancestors, because I think that's the main theme of this. And I think the reason you bring up the diamond is because that definitely is a threat to remembering your ancestors, our ancestors, in a concrete way here where we are. My greatest memory is of when the wagon train left from Greene County, Georgia, the most important time in my life. It was in 1808. That was my life. The wagon train took 2.5 to 4 months to get to southern Indiana.
You mean 1908?
Beg your pardon?
You mean 1908?
No, 1808.
You were alive in 1808?
No, but I remember it. Every morning I wake up remembering 1808. Okay. Absolutely. Okay. And I now have a computer, and my goal is to find out if there are kinmen's left in Greene County, Georgia. And my fantasy is that at this time I will react like some of the white resident ancestors of Andrew Thomas Jefferson and say, yeah, isn't it great? Two people found each other, and they're people of dark skin with my last name. Now, this is what I want to say. I think your problem is simpler than you think in saving Shockoe Bottom if you realize the timing of the decision that will be made regarding the ballpark. Everything in the paper, the Richmond paper, says that they are on the verge of making a decision. I thoroughly agree, and we must save the burial ground, and we must have that a heart of our downtown. But I think to do it is to realize that time is not on our side, discuss the importance and how we can change other blacks and how we can change other people and think that we can't be on the front lines. I'm saying this, we have to realize that the decision is going to be made within 3 or 4 weeks, perhaps, regarding the diamond. And we are not, as might have been implied by a wonderful person who spoke, where we can't speak to the powers now. The people who go to the diamond are 3/4 of them from the counties. Perhaps a third of them are black. And black people, you must sympathize with them, you who are black and I who am white, because they have an investment in this. You see, to us, the ballpark is spiritual. There is no other place in Richmond, except for some churches, where physically people of different colors and different backgrounds enjoy each other. It is spiritual. The lessons of life are taught there. My father was not close to me, but Ossie Boogie was the third baseman in 1934 with the Washington Senators. I woke up thinking of Ossie Boogie within the last week. Talk about the wonders of God. So we find a model for manhood in men on a game where we can watch them night after night, and after the game is over they say, well, Dave, we lost tonight, but that's life. Sometimes we lose, sometimes we win. That's God's life that we have received. So getting back to the present, I'm not shaming, but I do want to tell you that I'm modeling something. Yesterday I got put in a call to the mayor's executive assistant. She goes by a doctorate. She's Dr. So-and-so. I left a word for her, and I expect to hear from her. Not because I'm a man, not because I'm a bad person, but because I will talk with conviction and simplicity and not shame her and just say, you must know something. The heart of the future of this area, beyond Richmond, is in the ball diamond. If you poll the people that go to the ball diamond, there's not a single one that wants to go to Shockoe Bottom. Last night we had 9,000 there. I phoned the ball diamond the day before yesterday, and the average is 4,255 per game. Don't tell me you can jerk those people down to save the economy of Shockoe Bottom. You think that the people of the counties will love us for that?
Thank you so much.
I say let's immediately flood with phone calls to the mayor's office and say, I don't know who the hell is making that decision, but I want you to know that none of us are going to follow down to the ballpark in a new spot that's over barreling ground. But it's perhaps not just to say the barreling ground at the moment, because that mixes issues. It's just that there's spirituality that must not be violated.
Thank you so much. I think you've encapsulated the discussion in terms of the purpose of a baseball stadium. I just wanted to follow up on a couple of points that were made, and then I'm going to turn the program over to Phil so we can continue discussion about what to do next. And one of the things that I have been hearing is about the Slave Trail Commission, the city of Richmond, the mindset of African American people and white people and where we are. I encourage everybody to take a look at when the Slave Trail Commission decided to put the medallions in the ground. They did a program, and it's on Channel 17. And I ask you to listen to Dolores McQuinn, because she's the head of the Slave Trail Commission, and she, you know, if you listen to her speech, you'll see exactly where that mindset is. And over and over and over and over in that speech, she kept talking about the Negro story. And for me, it was heartbreaking. It's really heartbreaking because that just shows, you know, where the Slave Trail Commission is. And I just bring that up, you know, for our food for thought, because it's very important. Also, I think, if I'm not mistaken, this whole area used to be called Wall Street. Yeah, so this whole area where we're talking about now in terms of a baseball stadium and in terms of, you know, erasing history, this is all formerly Wall Street. So we, you know, it ties in very nicely to the Oklahoma story as well. Let me go ahead and turn the program over now to Phil Waleto, who is going to facilitate our discussion about next steps.
Thanks, Monica. Thank you, Anna. I'm Phil Waleto. I came with Anna Edwards. That's a joke. Okay, so what do we do?
Are you really?
I'm the editor of the Virginia Defender newspaper and a member of the Defenders for Freedom, Justice, and Equality. And now the point on the agenda is, what do we do? And I know there are some folks here who have been involved in this issue for a long time. There are others that this is a fairly this is a fairly new, introduction to the Richmond situation. So I do want to, emphasize that a lot of work has gone on in this area for many, many years, going back more than 20 years, when Elizabeth Camborian, a local historian, was writing a book on the slave rebellion leader Gabriel. And she found an old map of Richmond. And on that map, there was a little area called Burial Ground for Negroes. And she looked into it and investigated the history and the deeds and so on. And she was able to explain to people that there actually was a burial ground in Richmond, in downtown, that at that time was used as a parking lot. And it took a long time to get attention from people and interest in it. The Legba Folklore Society was one of the early supporters and incorporated the site on their annual night walk of enslaved Africans. And then the Defenders got involved about 10 years after the map was discovered, and others got involved, and eventually that struggle was won, and that former parking lot is now a memorial park that unfortunately is under the control of the Slave Trail Commission, some of whose members are now talking that they should reduce the size of that area because it's too hard to control, and put some parking on there so people have a place to park when they come to visit it. So that's part of what we're up against. I wanted to go over what has been done on this particular struggle so far, to kind of bring everybody up to date, and then a couple of proposals that I wanted to throw out for discussion at this meeting. This is not the great town hall meeting that we were going to have on this issue, but any meeting in Richmond that has 30 people has some validity and credibility, and we have 35. So we can do some things. First of all, I wanted to emphasize that no group, no matter how long they've worked on this issue, no individual, no matter how long they've worked on it or whatever sacrifices they made, owns this issue. This affects every single person in this entire country, but only the black community has the right to decide what happens to this sacred ground. This area of Shockoe Bottom that we're talking about, where they want to put the stadium, was the slave trading district. 40 to 50 auction houses, separate auction houses, all along 15th Street, which was called Wall Street, and North Broad, where there were dozens of slave trader offices and companies that serviced the slave trade, like the beginnings of the Tallheimer family company here in Richmond, known for the old Tallheimer's department store, the one with the tea room that only whites could go to. 17th and Main Street, they started out as a dry goods store servicing the slave trade. The railroad tracks that run down there, the original railroad companies used to advertise, if you send your adults with us, we'll take the children for free, referring to the slave trade. That area is not only a sacred ground for the black community, it's a land of shame for the people who made their fortunes there, who shaped the development of Richmond, of Virginia, and the entire United States. That's why Virginia was such a rich colony, why it produced so many of the early presidents, because it rested on slavery. So I'm saying this also to say that nobody has to ask for anybody's permission to work on this issue, to go out and do something, take an action, and so on, with the one caveat that those of us who are not from the black community need to consult. Okay? And that has been what has been happening around this issue. Some of the things that's been going on, speaking of which, Collective X went out to a ball game at the Diamond and went up to the bleachers and unfurled banners that said, no stadium in Shockoe Bottom, the Flying Squirrels like the higher ground. Now, I think they were almost all white, and they went out there and they did not know what reaction they were going to get. They're in the bleachers, and there's thousands of people there, you know, and they didn't know how they would be received. That takes courage. As a matter of fact, there was absolutely no hostility. The fans applauded them, and the employees at the stadium came up and thanked them, said they didn't want to go to Shockoe Bottom either. They liked it at the Diamond.
Absolutely.
So that's an example of a kind of an outreach. And the crowd is mixed, but it is majority white. So you have some young white activists going out to reach out to white people on this issue and explaining that this was important to the black community. That's healthy, I think, in Richmond, and somewhat of a new development. The African Ancestral Chamber and the Unitarian Universalists of Richmond co-sponsored an event on Memorial Day to honor the warriors of the ancestors, warriors among the ancestors who fought against slavery and fought to defend their community. And this, I understand this is now going to be an annual event. So that's another day that we've taken from the calendar and snatched back from a pro-war, honor the veterans except when they need health care type of program, to a real, honor the veterans who fought for the community. On April 3rd, the Ancestral Chamber and the Defenders co-sponsored a vigil at the corner of 17th and East Broad Street, next to the Exxon gas station. And the Exxon gas station would be in right field of the stadium. And the Exxon gas station is on the site of the jail owned by Silas Omohundro. He had 3 sites in Shockoe Bottom area, according to Elizabeth Kimbori, who did a lot of that research. And it appears that the jail site was where the Exxon gas station is. So we had about 30 people, and we had a nice vigil that was covered in the daily newspaper and the Free Press and the Defender. That was on April 3rd because April 3rd was the 150th anniversary of the liberation of Richmond. It's sometimes referred to as the fall of Richmond. That's incorrect. It was the liberation of Richmond when the Union troops, led by black soldiers, marched into the city, put out the fires set by the retreating Confederates, broke open Lumpkin's jail, and held a rally on Main Street of thousands of people and declared the end of more than 200 years of slavery in the city of Richmond. And why is this not a holiday? Why isn't this the most important day in Richmond history? See, we need to recover, reclaim, snatch that date back out of the calendar. But there was a vigil this year. We've set up a website, a blog spot, where you can go and access the history of this area, commentaries on it, even the arguments by the stadium proponents on why they want the stadium there and a rebuttal for it, and a petition, and an online petition against the stadium, and information on how to email the mayor and city council. We should have had little slips of paper, but it's shockoebottom.blogspot.com. Very simple. shockoebottom.blogspot.com. Every time someone signs the petition, and the petition is so simple, it has a long introduction, But the actual, where is it? We have it. We have copies of the petition. I know we have copies of the petition. Oh, here it is. Thank you. It's newly formatted, so I didn't recognize it. It says, to Mayor Dwight Jones and members of the Richmond City Council, I oppose building a baseball stadium in the Shockoe Bottom district of Richmond, Virginia, a place of great historical importance to people of African descent. Bang. 257 signatures as of this morning, and every time someone signs online, it goes straight to 9 members of the City Council and the mayor. So they have heard from 257 people so far, plus the emails, and we have the list of all the email addresses, and they're all bunched together, so all you got to do is cut and paste, and you can send an email to them, and people CC us, so we know that they receive many emails as well. That, a couple of hundred, objections to any project in Richmond is a lot. And I think it's one of the reasons we haven't heard the announcement yet. One of the things the Slave Trail Commission is on the spotlight for is the mayor and the governor want them to endorse this project. How do we know that? Because Dolores McQuinn told people at the last Slave Trail Commission that she was meeting this past week with the mayor and the governor. The governor is taking time out from covering himself on his various scandals to come here and try to push a stadium in Shockoe Bottom. And they're going to gang up on Dolores McQuinn, and you know they're going to tell her, look, there's a lot of things you want to happen with that little tiny strip of land that holds the burial ground and the Lumpkins Jail and the end of the walk of enslaved Africans, and we can help you if you give us the other side of the railroad track. So Anna and I wrote a nice little email to Reverend McQuinn, and she reminded her that in the past she has come out against the stadium, and that we promised that if she stood firm in that position, that we would support her, but that those who allowed a stadium to be built in Shockoe Bottom would have to live with the legacy of having betrayed this sacred site. And then we CC'd all the members of the Slave Trail Commission, one of whom, Janine Bell, then invited the defenders to have a table on this issue at the Alegba program this evening. And the director of the Alegba is the vice chair of the Slave Trail Commission. So there's, in terms of an overall strategy, there are a lot of different things happening. There are actually 2 committees working on this now. One is the committee that the African Ancestral Chamber and the Defenders formed, and it includes the Unitarian Universalists and Collective X, folks from Bainbridge Collective. These are some of the young activist organizations that have come out either out of or around the time of the Occupy movement. That group has been meeting every couple of weeks to plan different activities and get the word out and so on. The other group is based in Church Hill. It's primarily white professionals who have who are opposed to the stadium for various reasons, but all of them recognize the importance of the historical importance of the site to the black community and see working in cooperation with that community as key to stopping this project. One of them includes Randolph Bell, who's a former U.S. ambassador at large, who's connected with the First Freedoms Foundation here in Richmond. He's a part of the grouping towards the top that can talk to people. And others are economists and attorneys, and one guy works on promoting tourist attractions, and so he's looking at this whole stadium project from the point of view, would it be economically viable, and so on. So the Chamber and the Defenders attend those meetings, as well as keep this community meeting together. And all of the information from both of those groups is gradually being posted on shockoebottom.blogspot.com. So people are taking different approaches. There was an editorial for and against the stadium in last week's Times Dispatch, and Randolph Bell and another person from this Church Hill committee, answered it with the economic argument, and also, paid homage to the history of the area, black history of the area. We're also, most of the names on the petition are local, which I think is a very, very good way to start. You get a couple of hundred names, but most of them are from California. That's not going to impress City Council. But you get a couple hundred, and 90% of them are local, and then it expands. That starts to get their attention. So Anna and I are trying to reach out to various networks that we're part of. Anna with the Black Left Unity Network, which is a group of black leftists in the country who have a conference call once a month, and one of their members Shockoe Bottom was just elected the mayor of Jackson, Mississippi. And we're going to be asking him to weigh in on the issue. Anna was interviewed by the Black Agenda Report editor, Glenn Ford. It has a wide national audience online site. She's also been in touch with John Hope Franklin, the eminent historian. Blakey, by the way, who was mentioned by the sister from the Sankofa Project, would have been here today, but he was out of town. He's been very strong in support of the whole struggle around the burial ground, and he sent his, his regrets, but otherwise he would have been here. So we're trying to reach out nationally. We're asking people with some name recognition from the black community to sign the petition, and there's a place to put a little thing about why you have signed, why it's important to you, and then we'll pull those quotes out as a special section to show that there's national opposition to this stadium. It's attracting attention from black leadership around the country, which will be very important. And then Anna, she's president of the Virginia Friends of Mali, and through those connections and our friend Robin Poulton, during the burial ground struggle, the Prime Minister of Mali twice contacted the president of VCU and asked him, was it true that there was a parking lot over the burial ground of his ancestors from the Malian Empire? Prime Minister of Mali. So we're trying to pursue some of those contacts again.
Can you sign it on paper?
Yes, that's the other thing. Here we ran off copies this morning. Okay. So going forward, we want to work in a lot of different directions. The Churchill Group, they have folks with the expertise to say, you say it's going to produce this much revenue and this kind of tax abatement and this incremental funding and blah, blah, on that level. And they say, no, it's actually not. And they give you the facts and figures and so on. So that's a good argument. We want to reach out to the communities, all the communities, but particularly build the awareness of this issue in the black community, which will make the difference. And so we've taken that simple petition and turned it into a written petition, and we're asking people to take copies of this, everybody. We got 35?
No, I printed 20.
You printed 20. We're in trouble on printers at our office, the spare bedroom. So take one, make copies of it, use it, and then you can return it to Shockoe's Merchandise. Shockoe's have a store on 2nd Street, which was the old Richmond Black Wall Street, just a half a block up from Broad, and they said that they will collect the petitions and people can slip them in the slots of the door after hours. Amal?
Yeah, I'd like to say also, we may ask what is it we can do. This, I like to call it the Lois McQueen Show, and anti-slave trail commission, because when you look at the agenda, it's just her name all up and down it. And it was an excellent letter that you wrote to her, letting her know that we will support her if she stick to her guns. But if, any of us, anytime go to have a meeting at the first Thursday of each month at Churchill Center on Jefferson Avenue and 25th Street.
But this month coming up, it's going to be on the second Tuesday.
I'm not sure, but I do know that.
Yeah, because of the holiday.
Because of the holiday, yeah. But that schedule is the first Thursday of every month. If we just continue to go there, 3 people, 4 people, 5 people, and let them know that they can just have carte blanche in a quiet community. Send them, let them do what they want to do. I think it'll make a lot of difference too.
Excellent. Yeah, and let's take that up as a separate thing also, because Sean's made a specific proposal for the next meeting, which will probably mean the next meeting will be canceled. But, so we want to do this outreach. We got a petition, take the petition and go through your neighborhood. Pick 6 blocks. I mean, do it the old way. Yes, we use Facebook. Yes, we use Twitter. Well, I don't use Twitter. But yes, we use online. We got all of these electronic ways to reach people. But when you take a piece of paper in your hand and you with a pen and you go to your neighbor and you say, "Would you sign this petition?" Well, what's it about? Well, let me tell you. You're having a dialogue, a face-to-face dialogue, a discussion. You're popularizing the issue. Gee, somebody came by the house today and they wanted to sign a petition. Did you know that they want to put a stadium on the old slope? Did you know? So that's face-to-face, old-fashioned shoe leather organizing is critical. We can get to 1,000 very quickly if we work together. When we get 1,000, that's enough to get media attention to call a press conference. We'll have a press conference down at Shockoe Bottom, and we'll try to get some people with some name recognition, and as well as community folks. Matter of fact, our press conferences are always rallies, so everybody comes, and it looks good. But that'll be another. That'll be another milestone. Get the petitions, get to 1,000 names, have a press conference. Get the statements by black leaders around the country, put that into a separate section on the website, have it at the press conference. We want to start having more visibility. A lot of people don't read the newspaper. They get the news from the television. And the television is, what was that? I don't know how many times, if you're an activist, you go to work the next day and somebody says, I saw you on TV last night. You're on TV, right? What was that about? They don't listen. They don't know what it's about. We don't, and it's not their fault. I mean, if it bleeds, it leads. You got a car crash, you got a bank robbery, you got a fire, you got a demonstration about something, and then you got, so we have to be our own medium, with the newspaper, with the radio programs, with the online sites and so on, but also out in the streets day to day. Now, we also need a flyer that explains more. We need a poster, and that poster should be all over the city. You should know something about what's going on other than who's playing at the Campbell's tomorrow night. There should be a poster on walls around the city. We got a lot of empty walls. I'm not suggesting people do it, that's illegal. But if you, just to know that it's there. There's also an old thing called banner drops, where people make a nice big banner and they go on one of these overpasses over I-95 and drop a banner and tie it securely to the fence, and top and bottom. Wire's good. A lock better, but you can do it just before a rush hour in the morning or evening, and you get folks out there, you do it, you leave, and cars driving into the city or going home see no stadium in Shockoe Bottom defend Richmond's African history. When that, then they go, well, this is something, there's something really going on here. The posters, the flyers. Somebody came to the house and saw a banner. I picked up this newspaper. I never saw it before, The Defender. They had an article about it. This makes it an issue that people start talking about. So the mayor has to think, oh, God, is this going to be controversial? That's the other thing. As Brother mentioned here, we could wake up any day and there's a press conference by the mayor, and it's a done deal. They've signed the contracts. It's over, right? No, it's not. April 3rd, 2015 is the 150th anniversary of the liberation of Richmond and the ending of slavery. And I want to propose that we don't necessarily decide on it tonight, but we think about it, calling a national protest in Shockoe Bottom for that date. And we call it soon, so that whoever votes for this stadium, whoever approves it, whoever takes a contract, whoever plans to work on it, will know that there will be a massive demonstration outside that construction site on April 3rd, 2015. That's how we won the burial ground struggle. It was the 150th anniversary of the Civil War, and McDonald, who wanted to be considered the vice presidential candidate with Romney, didn't want this hot potato on the table after he'd already messed up on the resurrecting Confederate History Month. So he wanted that off the table, and he got the legislature to appropriate $3.1 million to pay VCU for the parking lot. They worry about those kind of things. We don't have the economic power to stop these folks. We can't put an argument together that's airtight and says, this won't work for you, because that's not what they're worried about. H. Louis Salomonsky is the largest downtown developer. He owns 5 or 6 current big projects and all kinds of other smaller things in Shockoe Bottom. You put a stadium there, his real estate values rise. No question about it. And who is Salomonsky? He's the guy who went to jail in 2003 for bribing Gwen Hedgepeth on city council to get a pro-developer mayor elected. He's a sleazeball. He wants to put a residential tower on Libby Park and block the historic view of the bend in the James River, which is why we're named Richmond, after the bend in the Thames. And so. Not that, go defending all that history, but what I'm saying is, the guy has a short-term mentality, and he wants poor people, those who make less than 100,000, out of the city, and he says so. And the other developers want the area where the diamond is, some of the most valuable property. How do we know? Because Bill Panelay, who Salomonsky wanted as mayor, and was the president of the city council, says that he works with developers, and they all say that's the prize in the city, the area on the boulevard by the diamond. So get rid of the diamond, develop the boulevard, make a lot of money, move the stadium downtown, Salomonsky and the other developers make a lot of money. They don't care what happens in the long run. They don't care about the reputation of the city. We won't convince them with logical arguments, and we can't outspend them. We can make this stadium so toxic. We can make them understand that there will never be a day of peace if they build the slavery, the stadium that racism built. That's what it will be. We can picket it every game. We can get our friends around the country to picket it. We can if we can't get an anti-racist demonstration in San Francisco with the Giants at base, we should give up. We can do that. Oakland. We can make this toxic, but what we have to do is build the base here in the city, because no one around the country is going to listen to us. They say, well, what do people in Richmond say? Well, they ain't saying nothing. That's not going to work. So.
Just a question. As far as getting the community involved, and as far as getting the community involved, do you have people that are going maybe to the churches, and one of the people did the burial ground, we're trying to get here to stand for the burial ground project, but we got thousands of signatures. But part of it was going into the churches where you have 200 people at a time on Sunday with petitions and having them sign them as they're coming out of the church. Maybe you can, organize something with the local churches and pinpoint all the churches you want to hit, not hit physically, but that you want to go to, and get them, tell them about the project, get them involved, and get their support. I mean, that would be a great way to grow the petition.
Exactly, absolutely. Absolutely. We need people to do that. If I can wrap up, and then I'll get off and we'll have more of a discussion from the chairs. But the specific proposals are, how many people here will take a petition and fill it out? There. All right, that's one. Wednesday is June 19th, the real Juneteenth. The day that black folks in Texas finally heard about the Emancipation Proclamation 2 years after it was signed. Holiday, and there's things going on this weekend around that. But Wednesday is the actual date. I'd like to propose that we go back to 17th and Broad from 5 to 6 on Wednesday and have another vigil at that site, no stadium, in Shockoe Bottom. Keep that visibility up. People go by, they see it, eventually they get to know what it's about. We have signs, we can spread out this time with the petition. And we need to do that fairly regularly. Traditionally, we've had problems saying we're going to do it every week, we're going to do it every month. People's schedules change and stuff, and they go up and down. But can we do it this time? Can we do it on the 19th, which has some historical significance? How many people would be able to come? That's enough. We have a dozen people. Wednesday, 5 to 6 at 17th and Broad Street. It's called Oliver Hill Way there, but it's what would be 17th Street, next to the Exxon gas station. So we're like 20 feet from where the stadium would be, on the sidewalk. And there's no problem having a vigil like that. And bring somebody, then we'll have 24 people. And of course we'll do outreach on it. As a matter of fact, if it's a go, we can whip out a quick flyer and bring it to the Allegro program this evening, where the defendants will have a table and other people will come, and we can pass it out. These people who will be sympathetic. I think get 1,000 signatures. We'll have a press conference. Everybody come. We have a sign-up sheet here. If you're not already in touch with us, you don't already know that you're in touch with us, please sign it. I'll just start it out. So just so you'll know about the next meeting, the community committee needs to set the next meeting. I suspect it'll be the week after next, but wrap up, yes. We should also send out a notice about the next Slave Show Commission meeting. Sean, are you going to be there? Oh, okay. Well, we should go there. The only caution I would have is, Dolores McQueen is African American. We want to have a division of labor in terms of our anger for those who go. I think folks know what I'm saying. Whites are respectful of folks even when they disagree, right? Black folks can be as angry as they want. And we'll support each other. But I sure like that idea of speaking first. I don't know how many times we sat through these meetings saying, there'll be time at the end. Oh, I'm sorry. So that's another thing. We'll put all this down. We'll send out a memo. We'll write up from the meeting and these different reports. And we'll be prepared that if there is a press conference that doesn't, an announcement of the stadium going through, that's not the end of anything. We'll call it immediate protest, and we'll let them know this is a continuing campaign. You can build it, but they won't come. Thank you.